The Ukraine-Russia war, one of the most complex and tragic events in modern world history, officially began in 2022, but its roots go much deeper. This war is more than just a conflict between two countries. It has profound implications for global politics, economic impacts, and humanitarian crises. When examining the causes, dynamics, and effects of the war, it's essential to consider the events following Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union, Russia's geopolitical strategies, Western influence, and the ethnic and historical tensions in the region. One of the primary factors behind the Ukraine-Russia war is the deep fracture in relations between Ukraine and Russia after Ukraine gained independence. When Ukraine declared independence in 1991, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, it maintained close economic and political ties with Russia. However, over time, Ukraine began to strengthen its relations with the West, particularly aiming for membership in Western institutions like the European Union, EU, and NATO. From Russia's perspective, this shift posed a strategic threat because Moscow wanted to keep Ukraine within its sphere of influence. Russia viewed Ukraine's potential NATO membership as an expansion of the West towards its borders, a significant security concern. Therefore, Russia's efforts to retain influence over Ukraine were one of the fundamental reasons for the growing tensions between the two nations. Ukraine's internal political structure also played a critical role in this conflict. The year 2014 marked a turning point for Ukraine. At that time, when the pro-Russian government of Viktor Yanukovych rejected an association agreement with the European Union and turned toward Russia instead, it sparked massive protests in western Ukraine. These protests, centered in Kyiv's Maidan Square, led to the overthrow of Yanukovych's government. His removal prompted Russia to take decisive action, and in response, it invaded and annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. This annexation was viewed as a violation of international law, leading to economic sanctions imposed on Russia by the West. Meanwhile, pro-Russian separatist movements gained momentum in Ukraine's eastern regions, and armed conflicts erupted in areas like Donetsk and Luhansk. Supported by Russia, these separatist forces fought against the Ukrainian army, resulting in the emergence of self-proclaimed independent republics in eastern Ukraine that were not internationally recognized. By 2022, the situation escalated dramatically. Russian President Vladimir Putin had been issuing stern warnings about Ukraine's possible NATO membership. Putin made statements questioning Ukraine's legitimacy as an independent state and claimed that Ukraine was historically part of Russia. On February 24, 2022, Putin announced a special military operation against Ukraine, and thus a large-scale invasion began. Russia aimed to quickly overrun Ukraine and topple its government, but the Ukrainian resistance proved far stronger than anticipated, leading to a protracted conflict. Cities like Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Mariupol became the epicenters of intense fighting. The war has not been limited to military engagements. It has also triggered a massive humanitarian crisis. Millions of Ukrainians were forced to flee their homes, creating a significant refugee wave across Europe. While the European Union and the United States provided financial and military assistance to Ukraine, sanctions on Russia intensified. Particularly in the energy sector, these sanctions significantly impacted Russia's economy, but they also put considerable strain on European nations, as much of Europe's energy needs were supplied by Russia. This energy crisis caused severe economic difficulties, particularly in countries like Germany. The global effects of the war have been substantial. On one hand, tensions between Russia and the West have reached their highest point since the Cold War. On the other hand, the war has disrupted the world economy, energy markets, and global food supply chains. Ukraine, being one of the world's largest grain producers, saw its exports severely hindered by the conflict. This disruption led to food crises, particularly in regions such as Africa and the Middle East. Moreover, the war contributed to rising inflation and further disruptions in global supply chains. Russia's invasion of Ukraine sparked widespread condemnation from the international community. Many countries condemned Russia and affirmed Ukraine's territorial integrity. The United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution denouncing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, some countries, such as China and India, adopted more neutral stances and refrained from imposing direct sanctions on Russia. This highlighted how different regions of the world have varying interests and geopolitical calculations at play in this conflict. The Ukraine-Russia war has also become a showcase of modern warfare technologies. Drones, long-range missiles, and cyber warfare tactics have been used extensively in this conflict. Ukraine, with the help of advanced weaponry from the West, has mounted an effective defense against Russia. Despite this, both sides have suffered heavy casualties, and cities have been devastated. The civilian death toll has reached tragic proportions. In conclusion, the Ukraine-Russia war is not just a struggle for power between two nations, it has become a conflict that is reshaping the global order. This war has exposed how international law, human rights, state sovereignty, and the interests of major powers can clash. While the outcome and the eventual end of the conflict remain uncertain, the consequences of this war will leave lasting scars on the world for many years to come.